All right, what is up, and welcome back to the channel. We are here once again for another enthralling edition of the Critical Podcast. This is our podcast we do once a year, every year, to sort of round out the year for our top 10 movies and top 10 albums and songs. So the first one we're going to be doing, and of course I'm here with my brother James.
What's up?
Y'all know how this goes at this point, pretty much, if you haven't seen the Critical Podcast before. What we do is we each say our number. This one's going to be movies, obviously, as I already said. What we do is we do our number 10, number 10 for me, number 10 for James, number 9 for me, number 9 for James, so on and so forth, blah, blah, blah. You get the point, all the way down up until number 1. So I will just say overall that this year was the year of horror for me.
Mm-hmm.
My list is extremely dominated by horror movies, which I was pleasantly surprised to find. I think last year was a lot of variety, which was great. This year is a little bit more straightforward. Lots of horror, which is great. I love that. My first, all of these are 4 out of 5s or above, which is like pretty crazy to say. Usually a lot of my top 10s reach into the 3.5s even.
Yeah.
But this year my top 10 was maybe some of the strongest ratings that I've had, which made it really difficult to choose from them. But my number 10 was one that I didn't really expect to be that good, which was Kingdom of the Planet of the Apes. I really loved this movie. This one is starting out a new trilogy, obviously, after the incredible Planet of the Apes trilogy that started back in 2012. This one sort of resets the whole thing years after Caesar's death. If you haven't seen that, spoilers, but I mean, at this point, if you haven't seen it, I don't really know what you've been doing with your time, but definitely watch that original trilogy. But this one kind of resets the whole thing with a new protagonist. It's the story is very simple. It's basically a revenge story, sort of revenge arc, but it plays it out pretty nicely. Really great CGI, as you'd expect from this series. Villain is probably the main weak point that wouldn't have gotten this any higher for me. Pretty basic villain, but it's one of those basic stories. Loved one dies, you go to get revenge, try to save the monkey tribe to a certain extent. But this movie was really solid. I was very impressed by how much heart and it really kept that original soul of like what Caesar built, and it didn't steer away from what the original trilogy was doing, which is what I was hoping. It sort of builds on that, builds on this idea of Caesar from 2 very different perspectives, which, that's probably the one interesting part of the villain, is that he twists Caesar's message in this way that's very, dictatorial and stuff like that. But this movie has really good human characters too. Like the whole cast was really great. That was pretty much my number 10, and I don't have a lot to say aside from that. It was a very solid movie that I was hoping would be as good as it was, and I was pleasantly surprised.
Yeah. So I will also agree with Joseph and say that this year was quite a good one for horror. I think my list is probably a little bit more varied, but I do still have quite a bit of horror in here. And we're actually going to start off with a horror for me. Now, the reason I put this at number 10 is that we just saw this, and usually when it's a movie that we've just seen, I sort of default it to number... If I like it enough, then I'll put it at number 10 default, but with more reflection, this movie could get higher. It's just I don't want to let recency bias dictate my list. But this one will probably end up higher next year when I put my movies list on my YouTube channel. Also, there's a lot of movies I still haven't seen that I want to see, so the list could change ever so slightly in January, but I still feel pretty happy with the list I have right now. But at number 10, and like I said, this could get higher, is Nosferatu. I mean, Robert Eggers is 4 for 4 at this point in terms of his filmography. It's incredibly impressive what he has accomplished here. He's made just 4 great, very different movies, and they all have great quality to them. And I've just been really impressed with what he's been able to accomplish with each movie. I think this is one of the best pieces of atmospheric horror that you can get in the year. Not the best, though. I do think there's a piece of atmospheric horror that's a little better than this one. But I really, the obvious. The visuals in this movie are incredible. Probably one of the best looking, if not the best looking movie of the year. So many shots, just immediately staying in my memory. The movie knows what tone it wants, this very dull, wintry tone, and it works very well throughout the movie. I love the grays and the stark whites. It's all very well done, very gothic. I loved, in particular, the scene in the castle with Nosferatu / Count Orlok. I thought that was just such a highlight of the movie, and if anything, I would have liked to see a little bit more of the movie take place in the castle, but also I understand, like, he wanted to not overdo it as well. But that was a particularly great scene. Performances across the board are excellent in this. Lily Rose Depp was a pleasant surprise for me. She was in a pretty bad TV show on HBO called The Idol a couple years back, where she wasn't good, but then again, the show wasn't very well written. So this was a nice sort of redemption arc for her, and I think she has a very promising future ahead of her. She just plays her role very well. Bill Skarsgård is excellent. Predictably, as Count Orlok, I would debate that he might be the most talented out of the Skarsgård family. Which is saying something because all of them are very talented actors, but I like him the best, I think. And he transforms into this role so effortlessly. It's wild. My favorite was probably Nicholas Hoult. I really liked him as Thomas. Put on a very understated performance, but he was a very sympathetic character. And I like that the movie could have gone the route, because the idea is that the main character is calling out to Nosferatu, and there's this sexual lust that she has originally, but she's very naive in awakening this monster. And they could have gone a more cliched route where she was constantly allured by the monster, but the movie actually keeps it consistent that she cares for Thomas more, and that her love for Thomas outweighs everything else. And I thought that was a really good thematic arc of the movie. Willem Dafoe was great as the professor in the movie. A role that fit perfectly for his acting style. He seems to be like Robert Eggers' sort of default actor that he comes to for movie after movie, and you can see why he works perfectly in the atmosphere. Aaron Taylor Johnson, I've seen on social media some people saying that he was the weakest point of this movie, but I simply don't agree. I liked him a lot in the movie, and I liked that he provided a more grounded approach to the whole thing. Like, his reaction to everything was very logical, in my opinion. Like, having the skeptic there helps the movie a lot. This wasn't the scariest horror movie, but I don't think it was trying to be scary. I think it was trying to be atmospheric, and it worked from that aspect.
No, and I mean, The Witch wasn't scary either, and it very much so was that same sort of vibe. He always goes for the more atmospheric rather than jump scary or tense or whatever. It wasn't even really tense. It was very much so just a straightforward vampire movie.
Yeah. That
felt very old-fashioned in the way that it did its horror. Yeah. Which is not a problem.
And if you maybe weren't a fan of, like, say, The Lighthouse, which I was, then this movie might be more up your alley, because it's more of... It's Robert Eggers' most straightforward movie, I would say. I think even a little bit more straightforward than The Northman was. But it still has some weird moments in it that work well. But I think it's hard to say. I think I like The Lighthouse the best from him still, but I think this is his most well-rounded movie to date in terms of what he's been building up to as a director. I think this has everything he's been wanting to do, which is what makes it so impressive. But yeah, like I said, this one could get higher for me.
Yeah. So, okay, my number 9 are from directors that I've come to love. This movie was probably going to be a shoo-in, if not for being the second vampire movie that comes in my top 10. But this was Abigail. These are the directors of Ready or Not, which was in my top 10 of 2019 when that movie came out. Yes. I love these guys. They do more comedic horror, which is a genre that I love because it takes this movie has some really gory parts, but amidst that is a an absolutely gut-wrenchingly hilarious set of characters. So it sort of sets it up as you'd expect. Well, not really as you'd expect. It's just this little ballerina girl. She turns out to be a vampire. And well, what she actually turns out to be is the daughter of what we assume is Dracula, which is funny. The ending really kind of leaves it open-ended, but it's pretty obvious.
Yeah.
But, my lord, I love the intense, non-stop action of this movie combined with just the gut-wrenchingly hilarious cast. Melissa Barrera is expectedly good as the main role. She's continuously impressed me since Scream. I know they royally screwed her over, but I think she is one of the best Scream queens, if you want to use that cliched terminology for her. Mm-hmm. But I love her. She does a really great job in her role. We understand, sympathize with her and her son situation. But obviously, these people just trying to keep watch of this person, you don't know why we need to, well, not watch over, they're trying to steal from this person, but they don't know who they're stealing from until it's too late. And then, when the sun goes down, they know they're fighting against the vampire. Alicia Weir plays a great role as Abigail. I don't know if this is her first role.
It is not. She also played in Matilda the musical. She played Matilda.
That's right.
So she's very promising.
No, she does a great job in building this hilariously sadistic young vampire girl who is both parts attempting to be sweet, but also this sadistic, bloodlusting daughter of Dracula, who actually kind of turns out to be a good person, but it's really it kind of flips itself around. Obviously, Giancarlo Esposito ends up becoming the bad guy because he wants all of the power for himself.
Yeah.
But this is just a star-studded cast. My personal favorite role of this film was Dan Stevens as Frank. He is absolutely hilarious. Some of the best sarcastic, one-liners. In the end, he just becomes this utterly sadistic, complete maniac he ends up kind of becoming the main villain too, but this film just sort of flips and flops around. Obviously the entire cast is just great. Catherine Newton, Kevin Durand is hilarious as this big oafy doof who he's kind of a clueless guy, but he has a bit of a heart to him.
Yeah.
Angus Cloud, rest in peace, obviously, but he has a great role as this sort of ridiculous, like, drugged up guy. You have all your cliches in this movie, but they do a great job of separating themselves in this very much so, gang of misfits ends up sort of understanding each other, but they're put in a terrible situation. It's a really, really solid film that I loved. Has some great action sequences, great music to accompany it. Sort of this orchestral, what you'd expect from sort of like a ballerina vampire movie, I guess, if that makes any sense. But I really loved, the acting obviously is the shining point of this film, but I really loved what they were going for. Very bloody, obviously, from the Ready or Not people. Probably more blood than in any other horror movie on my list combined for this one movie. But I really loved it. So yeah.
Yeah. Okay, number 9 for me. It's an action movie that I just went into out of curiosity on Netflix, but it really surpassed my expectations, and that is Rebel Ridge. This was one of my most interesting surprises of the year, and the more I thought about it, the more I liked it. It's got a little bit of the John Wick DNA in it, but it's not nearly as extreme. It's like a more realistic, grounded version of that, I would say. Because it does star a character who is just like a trained gun, a badass. He knows how to do all these crazy things, and people underestimate him throughout the movie. But there's a sort of an interesting twist with him, is that he never actually kills anyone in the movie. He uses he uses techniques to take them down, but he never goes full on bloodthirsty, which I thought was a really cool twist, and actually it makes him into the heroic character that they want him to be. It makes him very sympathetic and not at all like an anti-hero. He's easy to root for. It's sort of a modern day Western in my opinion, and it definitely has those vibes because it takes place in a small town, and this lone guy that comes in, he has to face off against the corrupt law, and he has to take them down, but he's a more honorable man than they are. And he also has this sympathetic motivation of trying to free his cousin from jail. Well, he's bailing him out of jail, rather. But for a crime his cousin did not commit, and his cousin is very young. And I really enjoyed this movie. It really grips you in, I think, and I really like the small town atmosphere of it. It kept it understated but very interesting, and it takes a lot of interesting twists and turns where you aren't sure who's going to be getting out alive and who isn't. Also, it has an actress that I haven't seen in a long time, Anna Sophia Robb, who plays sort of this news person that is trying to expose the police force for being corrupt. And I really like the chemistry that she had with the main character, Terry Richmond, played by Aaron Pierre, who I understand is going to be playing the Green Lantern in a couple years, which he's going to be perfect for that role. He was great in this. Excellent performance. Really played the tough guy role well, but you can tell that he has a soft heart behind him and cares for people. Just needs to peel back that rough exterior first. And yeah, I really found this to be a sort of good classic action movie of good versus evil. Don Johnson plays a corrupt police chief, and he sort of doesn't really do much of the violent acts in the movie. He's more the one heading them, but he is the most intimidating because his sheer presence. I mean, you can just feel the power emanating from him. He's very intimidating, and it was the final confrontation between him and main character Terry is very well done. Yeah, I just found this movie to be very strong, just very well done action, and a very fun watch.
Yeah, I'm gonna have to watch that one. I never got around to watching that. I heard good things about it though. Yeah. So, okay, my number 8 is Civil War. This movie had to be one of my most anticipated of this year. Alex Garland is a storied writer who wrote one of my favorite horror movies, wrote and directed Ex Machina as well. Uh-huh. One of my favorite horror movies of all time, probably. And this is his next offering. It's basically this dystopian future where there's a giant war going on within America, hence the name Civil War, obviously. This movie is about a group of journalists who are trying to go interview the president. Now that sounds boring, but obviously you set it in this war-torn America, and things are going to get a little bit interesting. This movie is obviously very heavy-handed in what it's trying to say, but it does it in such a way that's very understated almost. Its message is obvious, but it portrays it in a way that you almost feel like you could see it happening. Mm-hmm. The lead actress, Kirsten Dunst, she's been in so much stuff, but this might be her shining role for me, period. She is so good as the lead character, Lee. She offers this sort of dogmatic, sort of middle ground view of this whole thing. She's like, I'm just here to take pictures and document it. I'm not taking sides. And she sort of takes this underling in Kaylee Spaney under her wing, who is this young girl who wants to be a journalist. And through Kaylee Spaney, she kind of learns to, to see not the excitement, but the terror, because she doesn't, like, Lee is a character who is very unaffected by all this stuff. And she sees Kaylee Spaney slowly get affected by this stuff, and she realizes, oh, I'm sort of corrupting this girl into wanting to take pictures of this war, this horrible war that's happening. And it's this very interesting sort of communication on the media's role in portraying war to a certain extent. But albeit that, this is an exceptionally well executed movie that has some of the most intense scenes you'll ever see in a war movie. It's it's not as action oriented per se as a war movie. It's more of a contemplative. I wouldn't call it a character study, but it's very much so more contemplative, slow paced. But it has some extremely tense moments. You could really call it a thriller if you wanted to, because it is. There are parts that'll get your heart pumping, scared out of your life. Like it's pretty incredible. The whole cast is really good. Kaylee Spaney is probably my breakout actress of this year. Probably my favorite actress who did just so much good stuff this year. Got a shout out for Alien Romulus, which didn't make my list.
But didn't make mine either.
But she has definitely got a bright future ahead of her. The whole cast of this movie is just excellent. Your shining moment from a person who loves Jesse Plemons is gonna be a moment. You know, if you've been around the internet enough this year, you will have seen this scene countless times where Jesse Plemons asks, "What type of American are you?" And this is just one of those scenes that in 2024 it just pulls you right into it. It's like, yeah, I think I've heard that question asked before. Not in such a way where you're getting a gun pointed at you, but like you can really see it happening. It's a horrifying prospect, and Jesse Plemons just plays the part so well. And this part has not got any. It's got gunfire, one-way gunfire, unfortunately, but it's a very well executed, the most tense scene in the entire movie. That just it takes a moment to show you like what's going on, but like obviously, at the end of it, they do end up finding the president, and it's just this whole commentary on like how far are you going to go for the story, right? Like how far are you willing to go? And you know, this young journalist who wants to be a journalist, it's sort of this realization of, you know, it's Kirsten Dunst's character's realization that I've taken this person too far and now I am responsible for her life. It's her looking at herself when she was young and being like, do I want this to be the future for people, you know, for journalists? It's this very interesting commentary. I really love how Alex Garland put this story together. It is a brutal movie to watch, but I think it's one that you should be watching for sure.
Yeah. Great one. That would be an honorable mention for me for sure. At number 8 for me is what I would debate is actually the scariest horror movie of the year. Even if it isn't my favorite, this is the one that got to me the most, and that is The First Omen. I think this is probably one of my favorite like legacy sequels / prequels to anything that I've seen. I just think it is so well done. It honors the original very well without like overly relying on fan service and nostalgia. It tells pretty much a fresh new story here that I really enjoyed. The opening moments of this movie is probably one of my favorite cold opens of the year. Just the cinematography is very memorable. The way the stained glass window shatters, it's all very haunting. And you just feel the dread of what is happening from the first moments in this movie. I think there are so many great performances in this movie. Nell Tiger-Free gives a breakout excellent performance as Margaret. Women in horror always dominate, but talk about a particular year where so many lead women just put on absolutely killer performances. It was just wild to see. But she put on a great one, and I found out afterwards that she actually plays Cersei's daughter in Game of Thrones. It's just so fascinating to see how far she's come. She's just great here, very sympathetic character to follow along with. And you just, you feel the pit in your stomach because you feel like you know what's going to eventually happen to this character, just of how they're building up the story so effectively. Ralph Ineson puts on one of 2 great performances that he put on this year as Father Brennan. His voice is just one of my favorite voices to listen to in movies. He has this voice that captivates you, and it's very... I always like the dedicated performances he puts on, and that's no different here. He's probably my favorite part of the movie. I really liked what he did here. And even for the small amount that he's in it, Charles Dance's Father Harris in the cold open is very affecting as well. Um, and man, there's just so many memorable moments in this movie that you could point to. There are definitely some moments that are meant to be like tributes to the original Omen movie, but like I said, they're not overdone fan service, and it feels like they're meant to be foreshadowing for what will eventually happen. And the climax of this movie has got to be, I'd say, one of the most memorable of the year. And a part of that, a part of the reason for that is that there's one scene where they're actually giving tribute to a classic horror movie, Possession. I didn't know this until afterwards when I was reading reviews, but the part where Nell Tiger Free's character Margaret is like going through this traumatic birth process is meant to be like a dedication to Possession, and I thought that was pretty cool that they did that. It shows that they care about the classics and this and that they're really paying tribute to them. And yeah, and the way they connected it to the Omen at the end, I thought was really well done. It felt natural. It didn't feel like, oh, they have to do this. It felt like, oh, they felt it necessary to do this, and they did a good job of doing it without making it feel forced. But yeah, I found this movie to be very tense. Just a lot of genuinely creepy moments in here. Good combination of like classic jump scare horror along with great atmospherics. This movie had a little bit of everything in it, which is why I do think it was an overall crowd pleaser in the horror genre this year, and why so many people liked it.
Yeah. I don't have a lot to add because my number 7 is The First Omen. I don't have a lot to add aside from I think Bill Nighy's role was understated in this film. He puts on another masterclass villain. You can't really expect much anything else from him. But yeah, I really don't have much to add. Like you said, really memorable shots. You know, the beauty of being in, you know, Rome, Italy, you know, the just great cinematography. Yeah, I don't have a lot to add to that. So yeah, he pretty much said everything I agree with 100%.
Yeah. Okay, at number 7 was a movie that I was a little bit worried about due to the trailers making the CGI look bad, but I still had faith because this director is one of the most iconic, one of the oldest working, and he still proved to make a great movie. That was Furiosa, the sort of prequel to Mad Max Fury Road. I really enjoyed this. I thought it was just a really fun journey, and I mean, if there's anyone who can make car chase scenes look exciting, it is George Miller. He did it great in Fury Road, and I do like Fury Road better. Probably one of the best action movies ever made, if not the best action movie, period. But this one, I mean, this was a very good prequel. I wasn't sure if we really needed to know Furiosa's story because we know enough of it in Mad Max, but this movie proves that he had something in mind, and it is a sort of a classic revenge story in many ways about Furiosa as a child. Her parents are killed by Chris Hemsworth's character, Dementis, and as she gets old, and he takes her under his wing as his slave, essentially, and then he sells her off to the eventual villain of Mad Max Fury Road, and she becomes one of his many wives. But as she gets older, she eventually tries to find him to take revenge on him, and it could have played out. Revenge stories have to do a lot for me in order for them to work. It could have played out like a cliched revenge story where it's like the theme is, oh, the revenge will never be as satisfying as you want it to be, and that was where it seems like the movie was going at first. And if it had ended where I thought it was going to, it would have been not quite as good. But then they take it a step forward, and she actually does get to have her revenge, but in a way that is satisfying for her, and it's sort of twisted. I'm going to sort of spoil it here, so if you've not seen the movie, then you can skip this part, but she essentially uses him as a water source for a tree, and the tree grows apples on it. So he's perpetually giving his literal life to this tree. So she keeps him alive, but in the most torturous way possible. It's it's pretty messed up, but it feels fitting for the world that they're living in. And I love the like with Mad Max, I love the sort of oh, how do I describe it? The sort of combination of technology and old Western vibes that the movie has. Like, they have modern technology, but there's also parts of it. It's steampunk. That's the term that I was trying to think of. Yes. That's what this movie is. It's a steampunk movie like Mad Max Fury Road, and the style is excellent once again. Unfortunately, there isn't quite as cool of a moment here as like seeing someone playing a guitar with fire coming out of the guitar like in Fury Road, but there are still some really cool car chase sequences in here, and the movie looks far better than the trailers, which have you think the some of the CGI in there, it actually feels like it works, especially for the freaky world that they're living in. Anya Taylor-Joy, great as ever, gives a great performance as Furiosa. I really liked what she did here. Her performance is mainly silent, but she plays it very well. And Chris Hemsworth puts on maybe his best performance ever as Dementis. He is just eating up this villain role, and it just shows how much Marvel screwed him over, I feel like, with some of the later stuff he had to do as Thor. Like, he has so much more to offer as a performer, and I think this movie proves that. But, yeah, I mean, this movie was so much fun. And I think it felt like an action epic, and it did it very well. And yeah, I had a great time in theaters watching this one.
Yeah. So for my number 6, this is definitely going to be the single biggest standout, and surprise to me. I am a huge giga sucker for animation. And this movie, while I was pretty dang excited for it, I didn't expect it to even reach into my top 10, let alone be as high as it was at number 6. But this is The Wild Robot. Mm-hmm. DreamWorks is on this ridiculous roll of incredible movies. If I had have seen Puss in Boots: The Last Wish last year, before we made our top 10, it would have been within my top 3 movies of last year. This movie, while obviously it doesn't touch that mastery, this movie really, really surprised me. It has this, I mean, the standout of this movie, you look at the animation, like, it's basically the same animation style as The Last Wish, but my lord, this animation style is just drop dead gorgeous. I just love the way the characters are expressed, and, the movie basically revolves around this robot who lands on a strange planet, crash lands on a strange planet. It's a very basic, the plot is not going to leave you surprised, or, it's not going to have any plot twists, but there is so much gosh dang good emotion in this movie. It is a little bit of a tearjerker at times. Lupita Nyong'o puts on an awesome performance as this robot. A human mimicking a robot's voice can be pretty difficult. But I think she does a really great job mixing this robot that's like sort of supposed to kind of have a little bit of emotion twinged in there, but it's mostly just a robot. Pedro Pascal is great as Fink, the little fox. That he, his voice, he just has a great voice, and Fink is a great character overall. Kit Connor's Bright Bill, probably the standout of the movie. He's this little duck, or goose, or whatever it is. I think he's a goose. But he has this great role of like sort of finding himself. It really is a movie like that. Another movie with Bill Nye, funny enough, even though he doesn't come in until much later. Mark Hamill provides a great voice for Thorn, this addicted sort of. Why did I forget what animal he plays?
I can't remember either.
It's the porcupine.
Yeah, I mean, he sounds unrecognizable in the movie.
He has such a great voice, but it's incredible. This movie just has such a great voice cast, but it's really about this emotional journey for this robot who kind of becomes more than a robot. It's a very typical story, but I just really, really loved the emotional charge to it. It's a very different. I don't know if I would call it a different story, but it's a very different adaptation of like the robot becomes more human. The robot becomes more feeling in a way. It's not like the robot becoming human. It's like the robot, it's connecting back to Earth, and like, there's obviously the evil robots that come in, destroy the whole place, blah blah, that sort of thing. But this movie just presents this robot's turn in such a natural way. It's like it's not so immediate, like everything, and it's so fun how they use these robotic tropes to try to, like, she uses her robotic tropes to try to teach this goose how to fly, which obviously ensues with some hilarity involved. And Fink is sort of this hilarious third character who's always trying to eat the bird. But man, this movie really just got me in a way that I didn't expect it to, and it's way higher than it should have been. But DreamWorks just knows what the heck they're doing. So that's all I'll say about that.
Let's see. Number 6 for me is one of the top movies being talked about in Oscar conversations, and I think deservedly so, and that is Anora. This was definitely an anticipated movie of me, especially when I found out about it being like an Oscar contender, and I always try to check out as many of the Oscar contenders as I can, and I really enjoyed this one. I think it's sort of cool that we have a movie that turns into like a straight up screwball comedy and like the middle of it being in contention for the Oscars. This is one of the funniest movies I've watched all year long, and I wasn't really expecting it to be funny, but it is hilarious. So the basic plot behind this movie, it's sort of like a modern day Cinderella story in many ways. We've got the main character, Annie. Her actual name is Anora, but she goes by Annie. She's a sex worker, but she has clearly ambitions to move up in the world and to be richer. And she meets this young boy who is very rich, named Ivan. He's a young Russian boy. And he eventually bonds with her because they both can speak Russian. And he eventually just sort of hires her on to be a sex worker for him. But as the movie goes on, she sort of sees this as an opportunity for her to move up, but also she does gain some actual fondness for him beyond just, the physical relationship. And so Ivan proposes that they marry after only knowing each other for a week, which obviously, a little bit reckless, but Annie agrees because she sees it as a way to get everything that she's wanted and to live out the fantasy that she's always wanted in her life. And so they do get married, but it's eventually found out that Ivan's parents are part of what is implied, I think, to be a pretty dangerous Russian mafia. And they say, like, oh, you cannot be married to a sex worker. We have to annul this marriage. And so they basically come to try and get him home, get him to force an annulment of the marriage. But he sort of runs away, and then Annie, along with these two Russian thugs that work for the family, have to go and find him all night, and it turns into this sort of hilarious adventure of them trying to find him, and misadventure after misadventure happening. But then the movie turns very devastating towards the end. It takes a very interesting twist where it starts being a commentary on how people view sex workers and dehumanize them, and view them as less than. And it turns into an inevitable tragedy. The Cinderella story was obviously never going to work out for Annie, as the commentary here. And she eventually starts bonding with one of the thugs that is trying to get Ivan, whose name is Igor, played very well by Yuri Borisov, who she originally starts as hating because he, is restraining her and stuff and forcing her to annul this marriage. But they form a sort of bond with each other because Igor does not want to be a thug for this Russian mafia either. He hates his job. And so they form a sort of understanding between one another as both mutually hating the situation that they're in but not able to find a way out of it. I think Mikey Madison is great as Anora. She was in Scream, the Scream remake, rather. She was one of the villains in that, but she was very good in this. She's the one I'm sort of rooting for to win Best Leading Actress because she puts on an excellent performance here. She is so good, very funny, but also very devastating when she needs to be in this, especially in the ending with one of the most memorable ending scenes of the year, just really heartbreaking. And yeah, this movie looks great. Sean Baker is a very capable director. This movie was just a huge delight from front to back. Simple as that. I really enjoyed this.
Yeah. I'll say the same as you for my number 5, because this one would unquestionably higher if it wasn't for me also accounting for my recency bias. Even with my recency bias, it struck past my top 6 within a first watching. For me, that's going to be Nosferatu. There's no surprise here. This movie feels like it almost shouldn't happen with how incredible it is, but it did. Robert Eggers this guy is an absolute madman with how detailed and intricate every little shot in his movies are. It is perfection, almost perfection. The only thing points wise, and note to self, my top 5 is all 4.5s until number 1. So this is as close as it gets for me. The only thing I'll take away from this movie is there's a couple of lines that could have used some audio tuning up. Otherwise, this is a virtually perfect movie. Like Jim said, it takes a really interesting twist with the vampire story. Instead of being a lord, she ends up wanting to stop it. But along the way, the first part of this movie, surprisingly, is not really much of Lily Rose Depp's character at all. It's more focused on Thomas.
Yeah.
And like you said, Nicholas Hoult is a really big surprise in this role. He's usually a bit more of an actor in modern day stories.
Yeah, true.
But he plays really great into this part as this sort of just straightforward, like, I want to make your life better for his wife, but maybe gets in a little bit over his head with greed. I don't know if it's so much greed as love, but he was just tricked. I mean, it was a literal deal with the devil that he underestimated. Yeah. But oh my gosh, Bill Skarsgård as Orlok just absolutely blew my mind. Yeah, the accent he went with is it is pure evil. I can understand why he said it took him almost 3 weeks to get the evil that he felt inside of him. This movie is evil. It is. It makes you feel evil. Like, it is dark, sad, decrepit, all of the things. Like James said, the cinematography of this movie, there were multiple shots in this movie where I had to not say, oh my gosh, out loud for the fact that we were in a movie theater, but there are just gorgeous shots. There's this shot where Nicholas Holt's character is walking down this road, and it's this centralized falling snow amidst this dimly lit, like, it's not black and white, but like the genius of his like color scheming is like, it's so dark it almost looks black and white. That's how dark his castle is. It basically looks black and white, which is also a
good point.
That it's also a clever way to harken back to the original, is to make his castle look black and white almost, which is really cool. And yeah, my gosh, their whole conversation at his table in the castle might be one of my favorite scenes of horror of all time. It's not scary, it's just like you feel this like dread as like Nicholas Holt's character is basically forced to sign his soul away to Count Orlok. I will never forget his voice, and the many of those shots. Yeah, you gotta see this movie. It is utterly incredible. I cannot sing the praises of Robert Eggers enough.
All right, number 5 for me. Number 5 and number 4 for me, I sort of I interchange them all the time because I like them very almost equally to each other, is how close they are. But for now, and this could change, but at number 5 I have The Substance. Truly, I think this is the most balls-to-the-wall, insane horror movie I saw this year. It is actually wild what this movie does. Every single time you think in your head, they can't go any further, they somehow push the envelope even more. And basically, the envelope doesn't even exist in this movie. It's ripped into shreds.
They tore apart the envelope, burned it, and got a bigger one.
I mean... This movie is just insane. I'm not usually a big fan of like super gory horror movies. Evil Dead is one of the vast exceptions for me. But this one just does it well, and the gore also sort of has a symbolic point in the movie too, which is interesting. Like playing into the idea of Hollywood's body image expectations for women pushed to the absolute extreme. The commentary in this movie, it's meant to hit you over the head with how obvious it is. The movie is never once trying to be subtle about it, and it lets you know that from nearly the very beginning of the movie. Its tone is just perfect. It's a perfect tone. There's no problems with it. It's a great satire, but the commentary just hits that much harder because of how well the satire is done. The movie can be very funny at times, but it can also be very devastating at times too. And actually, my favorite scene in the movie might be one that's not even particularly gory. It's where Demi Moore's character Elizabeth is trying to prepare for this date with this guy that genuinely likes her. Like he actually likes her. The movie doesn't try to do a plot twist with that or anything. He sees her as genuinely beautiful, even though she's very insecure. And while she's getting ready for this date, she constantly is seeing things wrong with herself and constantly having to fix parts of her. And by the time she still isn't even satisfied with herself, it's too late to go out. It's one of the saddest, it's the best moment in the movie because it's so subtle. There's no dialogue. It's just very sad to watch. And you just feel, Demi Moore's performance is absolute aces. I would love to see her get nominated for a lead actor Oscar, but I don't have much faith in the Oscars with how little attention they pay to horror. But the fact that this movie is getting so much attention paid to it makes me more optimistic than I have been in the past. So maybe we'll see it happen. That would be awesome. But she's really good in this. And then Margaret Qualley as the other half, but not really other half because they're both the same person.
R1.
Yeah, Sue is also excellent in this. And, she's sort of the perfect choice for the more beautiful version of Demi Moore, even though Demi Moore looks great. Margaret Qualley is just undeniably hot. They really push that forward in this movie, and it's clear. But she's excellent in this movie, and the way her performance gets so unhinged near the end, I love the transition of her barely holding it together to her just absolutely losing control near the end. It really works. And Demi Moore gets her own cartoonish moments too. She gets progressively more cartoony as Sue takes more and more from her and disobeys the rules of what this substance is supposed to be. And it's just sort of interesting because you're watching, when you look at it on the surface, it's like two women being in competition with each other over body image, but then you realize, no, they're the same person, so it's like she's screwing herself over no matter what she does, in terms of trying to be the perfect version of herself. And I think that makes the commentary all the more poignant. Dennis Quaid is so despicable, and this is Harvey. There's no redeemable element to this character at all, but he is really good here. And then, of course, there's the obvious, gore that we need to talk about. It is, the way, and the body horror, the way they push the body horror in this movie is wild. The makeup is impressive in this movie. The way they just continue to deform Elizabeth is wild until the end, where it just leads to this moment that just leaves your jaw hanging on the floor with how far they take it. And then the ending, so much blood, just so much blood.
Yeah.
I saw people making clever comments on it being similar to Cinderella in a way, which I didn't think about, because she turns into this version of, she puts on a blue dress, she has to go to this thing before midnight, and it just all adds up to a corrupted Cinderella story in the end, which was wild to me to think about.
That's interesting, but it does make sense now that you think about it. That does make sense, actually.
Yeah.
That's funny.
And it's also just interesting because they revert the idea of body image, because it's ironically, even though she's the most deformed she's ever been at the end, it's she sees herself as at her most beautiful, and it's sort of sweet in a way. It's sort of weirdly sweet, but also very messed up.
Yeah, and that final shot, my lord, that has never left my mind.
Very affecting. I mean, yeah, this movie is nearly pitch perfect in terms of what it does, and a lot of people have this at number 1 or number 2 on their list, and I totally understand why.
All right, my number 4 is Strange Darling. This is, it's not really a horror movie. This one's more of a thriller. It was released at a festival in 2023, but it came out in theaters in 24. This movie does something that I am on the fence about whether it works or not, but it absolutely works in this movie. It tells the story in a sort of all over the place style. Like, it starts out in chapter 4, I think, and it tells the story backwards. Well, not backwards perfectly, backwards and forwards, because you'll go from chapter 4 to 1 to 3 to 2 to whatever, and it builds up this falsity that you think is going on. It has this really memorable first shot that I think a lot of people know of Willa Fitzgerald sort of running through this field in a red dress. Red herring, obviously.
Yeah.
But sure. It's not so obvious because Kyle Gallner, who plays the villain, is also wearing a red shirt. So you have 2 red herrings in this film, which is clever because they keep on making you think something else that it's not. So you originally think that you originally believe Kyle Gallner's character is this psychopathic mass murderer. You hear about this, forgot what the name of it is, the electric lady.
Yeah, the electric lady.
You think, you hear about all this, but you think it's just some sort of side note. You don't even really hear about it until like halfway through the movie. Mm-hmm. You think it's just some sort of side notion, whatever. But obviously the film takes twists and turns, and I'll give a spoiler warning right here so that you can skip it right here. Willa Fitzgerald's character ends up being the electric lady, and it takes an immediate turn. My favorite part of the film is the second part, which is chapter 3, I think, where Kyle Gallner's character is just quietly stalking in this house. That you have no idea about this house or why it is that she's there or how she got there or anything. But it's just so tense, and it's like Kyle Gallner looks genuinely frightening, and you're like, oh, this guy's out to kill this girl. Mm-hmm. You really believe it.
And he is, but not for the reasons you think.
It plays it so beautifully. It plays with you so beautifully. Like, you just, by like chapter 5, which is technically act or whatever, the chapter before the final chapter, you're like, okay, who is actually bad here? It's like Kyle Gallner's character, while he ends up being the good guy, quote unquote, he's got a lot of problems.
He does, no doubt. Yeah.
But Willa Fitzgerald's character has a lot of problems too. She's obviously the mass murderer, but like, you end up feeling sympathetic for her in a way. But obviously, the film ends with her dying. You kind of expect it, because she's a mass murderer. But I really loved the usage of the unparalleled storytelling in this one. It was very well done, and I was very surprised. And obviously, Willa Fitzgerald, great as always. Kyle Gallner is a great scream king, I guess you could call him. I've liked him ever since Smile, so he impresses here again. So yeah, I really loved it. Really loved it. Great cinematography too. Mm-hmm. Got to shout out that.
At number 4 for me, was from a director who was very much so in the indie sphere, releasing more small, low-key movies, but this one was definitely a bit more of a big budget effort for her, but I think it worked very well, and that is I Saw the TV Glow. This movie is incredibly powerful. It is symbolic horror to the extreme, but I think it works very well, especially because the symbol is a bit more unique here. Like, the TV is a symbol, the TV glowing specifically is a symbol, but it is meant to be a symbol for identity, for like finding yourself. And as a director, as part of the LGBT community, the TV is meant to be a symbolism for, I guess, finding your sexuality or something like that. But the movie keeps it subtle enough that it could be about any number of identities, I think, is what makes it so clever. But that part of the movie is a key part to unlocking it, so I don't think you shouldn't say that it's not about that, because it clearly is. But it's very interesting because it plays very much so off this 90s nostalgia too. The whole movie is screaming 90s, which is very fun, and all its visuals and stuff. And it's playing off another interesting idea that I think a lot of people from the 90s can probably relate to, like when you're up at night and there's this weird, as you get older, you have these weird memories of this TV show that you watched as a child that was a little weird, but they're like so vague that they're like distorted images and you don't really understand, and maybe you realize the show was a little creepy as well.
Shout out game devs for doing nothing but that this year.
But I mean, the movie is so interesting conceptually. It has these two characters bonding over this TV show that they used to watch, but the twist is that both of these characters, they actually belong in this TV show world. Now, the main character, Justice Smith, played by Justice Smith, who puts on one of the most surprising performances of the year. I mean, I've not really bought into this guy as a good actor for a while. I don't find him good in the Jurassic Park movies and stuff like that. The Jurassic World movies, rather.
No.
And he was in another movie a couple years ago that didn't impress me at all. But he is so good in this. I mean, it is wild. Puts on a great performance. But his character, Owen, he sees his friend, Maddie, played really well by Bridget Lundy Payne, as... she's the one who sort of introduces him to this TV show, but eventually is leading him to the idea that they are characters in this TV show, called, what is it called? The Pink something, I can't remember, but pink is, it's a lot of pink colors in this show, so I know it has pink in its name, but, he doesn't believe her. He obviously views her as maybe a little crazy, like, I'm a character in a TV show? What? How's that possible? But as the show goes on and as clues start to add up, he realizes, oh, I am a character in this TV show. And he eventually has these complicated feelings of going with her into this TV show and becoming who he's meant to be. But there's all these societal expectations holding him back, especially his complicated relationship with his father, who views him as delusional for all these fantasies that he has about the TV. But, I mean, as the movie goes on, it becomes the horror of, like, not accepting who you are and, like, losing who you are. The ending of this movie, it is one of the most haunting endings of the year I've seen. It feels utterly hopeless because he ends up not joining her in the TV world, and he ends up living the rest of his life out without accepting a key part of himself. And, man, I mean, I don't want to spoil it, but there's this outburst he has that is so bone-chilling, where he realizes just how alone he is in his own mind, and it is very powerful, very affecting.
So you're referring to the birthday party scene?
Yes. Oh, have you seen this?
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Of course.
I didn't know you'd seen it. But yeah, the birthday party scene.
I wasn't a super huge fan of it, honestly.
Really?
But I loved that scene. I don't know why. I'm curious if you got the same vibes from that scene. I don't know why that scene reminded me of the part in the Escape the Backrooms game with all the monsters in the party.
Oh, yeah, that's a good point. Yeah, I hadn't thought of that.
I don't know why it just gave me those vibes when they were just singing so loud. I was like, oh my gosh.
But the ending of the movie is what set it over the top for me, because it got to me. I mean, it was... And just the ragged breathing that he has, like the fact that he didn't accept his identity, like, affects him physically. It is just, I mean, I found this movie to be, I didn't like her other movies quite as much, but this one I really did love. It worked for me a lot.
Same with your number 4 and 3, and my number 3 and 2 could have been interchanged at any time this year. It's so close, it's down to basically one differential. My number 3 is The Substance. Once again, I don't have a lot to add. I was honestly surprised it was that low for you, but I know obviously you have a few more that are higher up. But I adored this movie. You know, there's, like I said, there's not a lot for me to add. Their performances are great. I really have to shout out whoever the editing crew was, because I think this movie had some super creative cuts. It was a very pacey movie. Each cut was really intentional, and especially towards the end, it just starts getting unhinged and then slow. But it really makes you feel, the panic, and obviously the cinematography helps in that too. All these super duper uncomfortable shots that you do not see ever. And I'd be curious to know what I would think I would know what type of lenses they used for this. But there are some fisheye shots that are just like, the beginning of this movie is disgusting. It made me reel back. It's like, like Dennis Quaid's sleazy character just engorging himself on shrimp is, oh my gosh, it was just disgusting. But yeah, I absolutely love this movie, and yeah, it's just completely unhinged, unbelievable what she did. Coraline Forget?
Or something, yeah, I think
Forget, I think that's how you say it. Unbelievable what she did. I really hope this movie sees some sort of awards. I know it's already gotten a few, but this movie it's a little bit out there to get awards, but man, I think it's definitely one of the most revolutionary horror movies created in a while.
Yeah. Also, shout out to the great soundtrack in the movie.
Yes.
So
yes.
good.
Yes, that we forgot to. We both came out saying that the soundtrack might have been the best part of it. Yeah. It just has this excellent 80s style beat to it. Yeah, I mean, the music is just great. It's fantastic. Yeah, the whole thing.
Yeah. At number 3 for me, and I'm not sure if there is any other movie that I could call like the definitive atmospheric horror. For me, this is like the definitive atmospheric horror. I don't think many other horror movies I've seen have come close, and that is Longlegs. I mean,
well, that's going to be my number 2, so I'll join in on the conversation.
I mean, talk about a movie just dripping with atmosphere in every single moment. I was so impressed with this. And this year I watched someone play gameplay of Silent Hill 2, and I can't help but think that Osgood Perkins was influenced by Silent Hill to some degree.
Oh, Osgood Perkins loves video games. This guy probably played Alan Wake 40 times.
Yeah.
With how much it's this small town Twin Peaks. It's got
Twin Peaks.
It's got Twin Peaks, it's got Alan Wake, it's got Silent Hill. It's got any 80s, 90s, it's got X-Files, it's got everything in it. It's this, oh my gosh, it's just, this is the type of horror movie, scary movie, that gives you the types of chills that you don't get from demonic, even though it is sort of a demonic horror movie, it plays it it is extremely grounded, it's not, there's not any fantastical elements, aside from the fact that, you sort of learn and progressively learn what the heck is really going on, which is like, what's really going on is very understated. Like you don't know what's going on at all until the ending, which obviously it's a huge twist ending. But man, like for me, the difference between The Substance and this was Nicolas Cage. He's had a really surprising resurgence, with Pig, and then this. This is probably my new favorite role of his ever.
It's quite good in this.
he plays this just completely unhinged Satanist who just, this man just loves Satan. Like, there's no ifs, ands, or buts about it. And this moment, I won't spoil what happens in this moment, but he has one of the best unhinged monologues I've ever heard. It's just, I mean, his performance is wild in this. He is sort of like the perfect opposite of Lee Harker's character, who is much more subtle, and her emotions are much more contained, whereas his are just front and center. It's just the stark opposites are perfectly done in the movie. I mean, there's something about his performance that is unsettlingly funny at times, which is what makes it work even better. Oh, he's meant to be funny, like there are everyone's seen the scene where he's in the car screaming mommy and daddy over and over like a rock star. Like he's like the unhinged leader of a rock band that went too far. Like nobody knows what his character's past is, but people are like, man, he might have been part of a rock band at some point. Like he has this like almost superstar energy about him that he's like, I'm the main character. I'm the one that is in control of everything. And I mean, really, he is for the most part. He's one of those villains who works in subtle ways that, it digs deep into your psyche. And the opening scene is probably one of the most chilling openings to a horror movie that I've ever seen.
Yeah,
it's like, oh my gosh, it unabashedly is like, yeah. I cannot say enough about this movie. Just it makes you feel like no scene is safe from this guy just randomly showing up and ruining everything.
Yeah. And I mean, talk about a movie that feels like utterly hopeless too. Like the investigation is just drowned with dread. I all the investigative scenes are just excellently executed. So well done, and just the dark, foreboding feeling you get anytime Lee is trying to uncover stuff. It just feels like there's always something around the corner that is going to be just terrible. And then the ending of the movie, it just goes in a totally different route that you're not expecting, but it all adds up together to make a very just unsettling package. And then the very impactful ending where it finally just sort of goes off, and I mean, it's just horrific. It's just an undeniably grim ending that just leaves you feeling more hopeless than ever. Leaving off with a final shot of like Longlegs, and I mean, it's all just so impactful. I mean, a lot of people have, as expected with horror movies like this that get a lot of hype, a lot of people have come around and started to say this movie is overrated, but I just do not agree. I think it deserved the hype it got. One of the best movie promotions that we've ever seen, but it lived up to the trailer hype and surpassed it, in my opinion. And I think, I think it deserves its laurels and deserves its popularity.
Oh yeah, I think this might be. I think this movie is going to end up being in my top 5 horror movies, possibly of all time, if not my top 10 of all time. Just yeah, it has this atmosphere to it that you don't see from horror movies often, and it does it in it's so I don't know, yeah, it's just so subtle, and like what a lot of horror movies have done recently is this like more dreadful, slow building. But like this movie, there's not really a single scene that's scary. There's one jump scare that you can really not even, you can categorize it as a jump scare depending on how susceptible to jump scares you are. But this movie is really a character study on two characters who, albeit follow the same path, but who are connected in a way they don't really expect. And it's like it's fascinating. And shout out Micah Monroe and Nicolas Cage. I was so glad they got to be in a room together, because like when they were together, you saw some acting chops. Like, oh my gosh, unbelievable performances.
Yes, so good.
And her mother too. I forget who played her mother. I didn't look it up.
Oh yeah. Let's see. Alicia Witt. Yeah, she was awfully good in this
she's good too. And she is the part of the movie that you don't expect to be as important as it is. But yeah, it if you haven't seen this movie, absolutely 100%, this is the best horror movie of the year.
Yeah, I agree. Easily the best. My number 2, I'll try to keep this quick because I think we're going to have a lot to say about our number 1.
Yeah.
We both have the same number 1. I am 100% certain. No doubt in my mind. But my number 2 is one that has stayed in my number 2 spot all year long. And that is Challengers, directed by...
Challengers?
Yeah.
Really?
Directed by Luca Guadagnino. I loved this. The funny thing about the director is that he said infamously that he finds tennis to be a very boring sport, but he makes it the most engaging thing you could possibly watch in this. And I mean, I found this movie to be fascinating. Just the constant shifting of character dynamics in the movie is constantly interesting. Like which character is on top, which character is making the most moves. It it all the character dynamics are interestingly symbolically like a tennis match, because it's like in a tennis match it might seem like one person is winning at first, but then another person can come back very unexpectedly and the tides can turn. So the character relationships play cleverly like a back and forth of a very tense tennis match, which I thought was just fascinatingly clever. All the performances in here are really good. I think this is probably my favorite Zendaya performance this year, which is saying something because she had another great performance this year that we're about to talk about. But I think this is my favorite of hers. She plays this just character who's locked in on her goals and nothing else very well. It's a very intense performance, but very well done. Mike Faist and Josh O'Connor are both great in this. And yeah, the tension between this trio of people, like, do they like each other? Do they maybe even love each other? Or do they absolutely despise each other's guts? Is just constantly at odds with one another and throughout this movie. And I just really loved it. And the resolution of this movie is not what I expected it to be at all, but it was such a cool resolution that I found to be really good. And this movie is bolstered further by the score by Trent Reznor and Atticus Ross. They always make good movie scores. I think I still like their one from The Social Network the best, but this one comes in a very close second because it is invigorating and really good. Yeah, I mean, I just love this movie. So much fun.
Yeah. So my number one movie is Red One. Shout out to Rock Johnson and Chris Evans. Greatest movie of all time. No,
easily.
Our number one movie is going to be Dune Part 2.
Dune
obviously.
Part 2, no doubt.
So here's the thing about Denis Villeneuve. He's the best director that's out there right now, without question.
Yeah, this solidified it for me. I mean, Christopher Nolan has been my favorite for a while, but Denis Villeneuve was always close, but he's number one now, no doubt.
If Blade Runner 2049 didn't do it enough, I think I said back in 2017 that Blade Runner 2049 might have been the strongest 5 out of 5 I've given to a movie, aside from, I think I've told you this, Blade Runner, I don't know if I've told you this, Blade Runner 2049 is probably my second favorite movie of all time.
It's in my top 10 for sure.
And that is the strongest 5 out of 5 I can give, aside from it not being Return of the King. But this movie, and while I will say I gave it a 4 out of 5 on first watch, because the movie did not sell me at first. The problem with this movie, the problem with this movie, which I'm now going to say is a compliment to it, is that it has so much going on.
Very complex.
It is an extremely complex movie, which could be a detriment to certain people.
Not many, though.
But our second watch of this movie was in IMAX, and I know it's probably because it was filmed on IMAX cameras to a certain extent. It has this aspect ratio that's designed for IMAX to show you everything that's on screen. Same with what Christopher Nolan does. The second watching really sold it to me. Mm-hmm. And I understood what was going on. And what's going on is this incredible story of discovering who you are, and not in a good way.
Yeah, definitely not.
You know, I said that my problem with Dune Part 1 and why that one couldn't have been my number one of 2021 was that not enough happened in that movie. I felt, while that movie has some excellent moments, I didn't feel enough happened sort of until the second half. This movie, so much stuff happens. You are getting slapped with unbelievable sci-fi moment after great character interaction. I just genuinely don't even know where to start. Just aside from just sort of getting into it, I don't know. Paul Atreides is such a fascinating character throughout this movie. Like that was my first impression of it. Is like, this is a man who is he takes the unwilling hero approach, but no. One, he does not think he's going to be a hero. He just wants to fight. But two, he is unwilling to accept what path has been laid before him, which is inevitably death.
What's interesting, and this movie, I mean, it's fascinating because Dune has inspired so many Chosen One movies, but the irony is that Dune is an anti-Chosen One movie.
Yep.
It is like, we do not want, and it makes it abundantly clear. I just find it interesting. Some people just so lacking in media literacy that think that this movie, it's a good thing that he ultimately, that Paul Atreides comes in power at the end. But the movie, I mean, it's just steeped in dread the whole time. Like, we do not want Paul to come in power, but every single event that happens is making it obvious that is exactly what's going to happen. And I mean, Paul has all the typical character beats of a Chosen One, of one who like originally rejects the call, but his mentor, in this case his mother, encourages him to accept the call and to join it. And he becomes the Chosen One at the end, and it seems like he's fighting for a noble cause. I mean, working for this group of natives who admittedly seem like, I mean, obviously have a right to the land and have had it taken unjustly from them. But, I mean, the twist is that his family lineage is part of, like, evil. The dictatorial fascist sect of people who have been ruling them all along.
There's a lot I know about Dune. That was the part that was like, oh my gosh, I didn't know his mother's a Harkonnen, which it's just stunning, but it's like, the line he says that solidifies it is like, he says, so we'll win by being Harkonnens. It's like, okay, he's turned to the dark side.
Yeah, he has, no doubt.
Denis Villeneuve does this really clever thing, though, where he's like, he paints Paul as this, like, I don't know if it's so much Paul willingly accepting it, which he sort of does, but his mother is the undeniable driving force of like basically forcing him into this destiny that he doesn't want any part of, but he's sort of forced into it. But in a way, you know, his exceptionally, incredibly well acted monologue in the meeting of the leaders of the Fremen is one of the most memorable moments of movie history, probably. Is the moment that you realize, oh, this guy has completely lost it. Like he now, it's this liquid stuff. You have no idea what this liquid stuff does, other than like it seems like it just completely twists his mind.
Yeah. And
it's such a tiny little part of the film, but you're like, did he just drink this? Like, he drinks this stuff and he just loses his mind completely. Like, and it ends up being from the sandworms, which is like so wild. Like, it's like I don't know. It's just it's this one little moment that's like he just drinks a little bit of the stuff, and now he's become a basically a dictator, which is for anyone who knows anything about anything, that's inevitably the direction that it'll go.
Yeah. I mean, the really clever thing that Denis Villeneuve does is he plays with the audience like we're his puppets so easily, because he does make Paul Atreides look very inspiring. Just the crowd that he can attract, and his final showdown with Phaedra is incredible. I remember I was underwhelmed by that scene the first time I saw it. I'm not sure why, because the second time I absolutely loved it. But everything about him, he does look like an inspiring leader, but then you've got the more personal scenes where it's obvious, oh no, there's something wrong going on here. And I mean, there's so much you could gush over on this movie. I mean, it is one of the definitive best sci-fi movies, and you just don't get movies like this much anymore. Nope. It just doesn't happen very much. So it's nice to see Denis Villeneuve making like a proper big budget sci-fi epic that takes itself seriously. This is what we said about Dune a couple years ago as well. That it's one of the few sci-fi series that takes itself entirely seriously, and takes the epic tone, treats it with the weight that it needs.
This is the movie series that has lifted my sadness from Star Wars away. Mm-hmm. You know, the visuals alone are enough to carry this movie to at least a 4 out of 5.
Oh my goodness!
I mean, my favorite sequence is not anything really character related. My favorite sequence has been from the beginning Feyd-Rautha's birthday massacre on planet Gaiety Prime, which has a freaking black sun that turns everything color inverted. Like, can you get any? Like, oh my gosh, it's so incredible.
Yeah.
And Feyd-Rautha's little interactions with Vladimir, who is played to absolute perfection by Stellan Skarsgård as usual.
Mm-hmm.
He is just an unforgettable villain. Just those moments, and then obviously he gets promised to be emperor. Just really great character interaction between him and Austin Butler.
Yeah.
I just love how unhinged Austin Butler plays Feyd-Rautha, this genuinely psychotic guy who takes after his father quite well, probably.
Yeah. It's sort of incredible how Denis Villeneuve picked young actors who are like among the top tier right now. Like, you've got Timothée Chalamet, who might debatably be like the top of his crop of actors.
I'd say so. 100%.
You've got Zendaya, who is great in this movie. Like I said, she put on another great performance this year, and she's really good in this one as well. Austin Butler, excellent character actor. You've got Florence Pugh in here, who I believe is going to be playing a bigger role in the next movie. And
you got to imagine
she was good in here for the time.
Yeah.
And then in the next movie, you're going to have another great actor, up and coming. Well, not even up and coming.
No,
I mean, she's been
Anya
great
Taylor-Joy
Anya Taylor-Joy. But just having that batch of young actors here, along with the experienced older group of actors like Josh Brolin and Rebecca Ferguson, Javier Bardem. I mean, you can't get many other better casts than what this movie has. It is wild.
I think the role that came around to me most... I've seen this movie 4 times. The role that came around to me the most was... What I think Lady Jessica, Rebecca Ferguson, I think she's probably my favorite character in the movie.
She's good in this one,
She just does this great job at, like, slowly becoming influenced by her unborn child who starts talking to her when she drinks the poison. And she just basically becomes this possessed... I wouldn't call her demonic, but, like, she I don't know if her daughter's speaking to her. There are fantastic elements to Dune that sort of surpass the sci-fi. There are fantastic elements.
I mean, in the book, they make it even more bizarre, from what I understand, than the movie does.
Yeah, but, like, I'd love to... The only thing I'd love to do, which maybe requires reading the books, is learning what this water of life does to people.
Yeah.
Because it just seems it turns them into evil that can't be turned around.
Also, speaking of which, my favorite scene from the movie is the one where the blue liquid is pumped into her daughter. That scene is just so utterly... I mean, that scene terrified me the first time I saw it. It's so well done.
and I think we gotta... I think people don't give enough love to Javier Bardem as Stilgar.
Yeah, he's great in this.
I love his undying faith to Paul, which is going to end up being to his detriment, I have to imagine.
Oh, no doubt. Yep.
But he is such, like... He loves his people, but he has this character flaw that he's just like he is a fanatic. I mean that they talk about the fanatics and stuff, but he plays his character so good as this guy who, like, he believes in Paul as a person, but he also has this undying faith to this prophecy that he himself seems like he's forcing himself to believe it's true.
Yeah, I mean, what Denis Villeneuve has a crazy amount of 5-star movies. I do still think that Blade Runner 2049 and/or Arrival is probably his best, but Dune Part 2 is his most ambitious by a long shot, and I think, I mean, the ambition paid off in dividends. I think he created an excellent movie with a very complicated plot, and I think he laid it out very well. You do need to watch it more than once to understand what's going on, but I think the amount of plot threads he had to balance here were so tough, but he did a really good job at working with all the political intricacies of the movie and making it very engaging to watch, while still making the main thematic arc of the movie very apparent. And I know what inevitably is going to happen. A lot of people are going to hate Dune Messiah because they don't, once again, have media literacy, and whereas Denis Villeneuve have made it obvious for 2 movies now that Paul was not meant to be the chosen one and he's going to be a bad person. But I have absolute faith. I mean, he's going to... Dune 3, it'll be hard to beat out 2, because 2 is, like, I mean, it's Empire Strikes Back level of good as far as sequels go.
It is. If you think of Dune Part 1 as A New Hope, it sets everything up. And while A New Hope is a fan freaking tastic movie, I'm not saying Dune Part 1 is bad by any stretch of the imagination, because it's a great first movie. But it is clear as day and obvious that Part 1 and Part 2 are meant to be watched back to back as a slate of one story. Because Dune, the book, is that. That's it. Like, that was the ending. The ending was that he was going to fight all the houses of the Imperium. And then Dune Messiah came about and basically changed everything. It's really, I mean, it's just great to see that this type of thing can happen. You watch the movie and it's like, something like this can happen. Like, it has an epic Lord of the Rings scale fight scene. Great, this fascinating sci-fi world that, like, and it is like extreme sci-fi, like Black Suns, like, it's awesome. And to have the type of cast that it does with it, I don't know, it's like magic, man. It's like the magic of movies is pretty much consolidated into this one film.
Yes.
Absolutely love it. But yeah, I think that's about it. Yeah.
Great year for movies.
Another really, really excellent year for movies.
Best since 2019, in my opinion, I would say.
Couldn't think that, last year you had Oppenheimer and Godzilla -1, but somehow this year ended up being just as good.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's going to be that for our top 10 movies of 2024. Like, comment, and subscribe. Tell us what your favorite movies were or weren't. And yeah, that'll be that. We'll be also doing our top 10 songs and albums, which will be releasing the same day as this. I don't know how I'll release them, but if it's after this one, great. If it's before this one, great. And we'll see you all in the next one.